Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Road to Renewal, Oversight Best Practices, and what every charter authorizer needs to know about charter renewals for 2024-25. Next slide, please. So before we begin, I just want to give a disclaimer that the information that we are going to present this afternoon is for reference. And if you are planning to act on this information, we encourage you to review the laws and regulations and to also consult with legal counsel before you act. Next slide, please. So I'm Mifala Fairley. I'm the Executive Director of the Charter Schools Department at the Santa Clara County Office of Education. Today, I am joined by my colleague here at SCCOE, Dr. Michelle Johnson, who is the Associate Director of the Charter Schools Department, and by our two colleagues from CCAP, Tom Hutton, who's the Executive Director of CCAP, and Dr. David Patterson, who is the Board President at CCAP. Next slide, please. So just a quick introduction of the Santa Clara County Office of Education and where we are in terms of our charter authorizing. Overall, we have 31 school districts that serve a little over 260,000 students. In our county, there are 63 charter schools, and those schools serve about 30,000 students. The Santa Clara County Board of Education authorizes 21 charter schools that serve about a third of the charter school students in the county. And the county board authorized its first charter school in 2003. And we have an actual charter schools department with 6 team members. Next slide, please. And Dave or Tom, could you share
Good
a little
morning.
bit?
This is my opportunity to say good morning and to introduce CCAP to any of you who aren't aware of what CCAP is. CCAP supports districts and county offices of education staff and high quality authorizing and oversight. We were founded in 2013 by authorizers to advance the quality of public school education. Our first piece that you might recognize for those who've been in the world a little bit for charters is we did our work with CARSnet. The first federal grant. We also had a second federal grant called the Tri-State Alliance for Improving District-Led Authorizing, and we're currently working with a third federal grant, National Network for District Authorizing, which we work with other states that also have charter district-led charter work. We have a strategic partnership with the Small School District Association because it's so important. The overwhelming majority of our authorizers are small, and we need to make sure that this process works. And now we're proud to be partnering with CASI, with Santa Clara County Office of Education and the Department of Ed.
Next slide, please.
So for today, we want to make sure that we allow for enough time for there to be a good breakout session for people to discuss things. And we have kind of a lot of ground to cover. There's a lot to this topic. So for handling questions for today's meeting, we've actually we've set up a separate way for you to post a question to the chat where rather than identify one of us personally or whatever, or send it to everybody, you just send, there's a send Q&A messages here. So use that to put your questions. We'll monitor that on our side. So we make sure we get to everybody's questions, but we still get through the content and still leave time for breakout discussions with smaller groups so people can bounce things around with people there. And next slide.
All right, so why are we here? With AB 1505, the rules changed, and then COVID brought us a 2-year hiatus and another 1-year hiatus. But now in 2024-25, it starts the process again. So there will be 230 renewals next year, 280 the year after, and 439 the following year. The reason for this increase in 26-27 is that it is essentially 2 years of renewal that have been combined into one. So as authorizers, we need to be prepared for the coming renewal season. So we're going to go through the process. FYI, you may want to go back and look at the charter terms for your renewals. Most of those charter terms begin on July 1st and end on June 30th. However, there are still some charters out there that have their term start dates and end dates as the date of the board approval. This makes things difficult if the term date is in the middle of the year. And should the authorizer not renew, the school would then close effective that end term date and would put district schools at a disadvantage to scramble to try and find places for displaced students. So if your charters have different beginning and end dates, consider adjusting to that fiscal year start and end date for charter terms in the future. Next slide, please.
So those of you who have come to CASI events or CCAP events before are getting kind of familiar with this graphic. It's from our national colleagues at the National Charter Schools Institute. And it's just a really nice way of sort of reminding us the overall life cycle of a charter school. And also that means the life cycle of the charter school authorizer relationship. It's national in the sense that the first little button at the bottom, the beginning, says application, which we refer in California to as the petition. But beyond that, it just sort of shows how you go through the life of the application stage. There's a startup period after authorization, and we sometimes call that year zero in California. And then the bulk of the relationship is the arc of the performance oversight and accountability, but that all culminates from the day the petition is approved with an eye toward what's going to happen with the renewal process, otherwise known as reauthorization. So that sort of 9 o'clock part of the circle there is where we're focusing today. And then, you know, the other thing that hovers over our awareness of it is that there can be a closure in the charter sector that can arise either from a non-renewal or if something really goes catastrophically wrong mid-charter term, a revocation. Next slide. Is this me? So yeah. So we're actually. I think the red circle should be on the reauthorization part of the clock. But again, the renewal process is the culmination, ideally, of an ongoing relationship between the authorizer and school, where they've been attending to how things are looking for renewal as that last year of the charter term comes closer each year. Next slide. And this one is kind of just a more detailed version that sort of maps out in, you know, typically it's a 5-year period, not in every case, but typically it's 5 years. And so petition approval, there's that year zero that I referred to. Some of the things that are happening along the way in the authorizing process, and all leading to that year 5, the renewal process and the renewal decision. Next. These are, you know, we always like to revisit the fact that there is not a huge amount of mandates in the Ed Code as to what the authorizer role is. And we tend to emphasize that the minimum legally required stuff in Ed Code does not equate to best practices in authorizing in terms of the fullness of the authorizing role. But it does say this is at an absolute minimum what you're required to do. And just as a reminder, you have to have a designated staff person who's the point of contact. You have to visit every school at least annually. And with respect to renewals, we again like to say people should be thinking about the prospect of renewal down the road when they're having those conversations with a school. You ensure that the school has to comply with all requirements that are imposed by law on charters. They have to have their own LCAP, an annual update for LCAP. You monitor the fiscal conditions all along, and the reality for when I talked about that closures part of the arc of the relationship is most charter schools nationally and in California that do end up closing do so for fiscal reasons. So it's very important that the authorizer attend to that. And you have to notify our colleagues at CDE if there's a high stakes decision, in this case, not like a non-renewal or a revocation, or the school ceases operations, or the renewal too. Next. I mentioned before that, you know, the minimum requirements in Ed Code are not the world of best practices. Yes, site visits. Sometimes it's advisable to have more than one site visit versus the minimum. Some authorizers make that a standard practice. Some do that if If there's things that they want to pay closer attention to, they say, in this case, we're going to come back and check how things are going. If we normally do it in the fall, for example, we're going to come back in the spring and see how things are going. Annual reports that are published where that's the authorizer reporting on the school as opposed to asking the school to do one, although you also could do that. But an annual report in which the authorizer sort of says, here's where things stand with this school. And by the way, with reference to its renewal prospects, if things continue on this trajectory, things are looking pretty good. Or there's some serious concerns about enrollment. That's something that could be an issue. So you so that there are no surprises for anybody when the renewal process comes, that some issue that nobody's been talking about for 4 years all of a sudden is a prospective grounds for non-renewal in year 5. You don't want to be in that situation. Monitoring the finances all along, and we mentioned that one already. You really can learn a heck of a lot about what's going on in a school by being present at their board meetings, or at least some of the times, or some of the meetings, or at a minimum monitoring and reviewing agendas, minutes, and exhibits to the board packet, as it were, for the charter board, just to see how things are going on in its own internal discussions. Authorizers in some cases asked to be on the agenda so that they could just sort of share, hey, here's what's going on from our end on the authorizer end. But that relationship directly with the charter school governance is a good one. And review data along the way, the school data, that's academic performance, that's the dashboard, the LCAP, the accountability. There's certain kinds of important data that it's worth rising to the level. Authorizers don't run the schools, and we're not on every little detail, but there's some very important big picture things that you ought to have a handle on. And this is all, we like to emphasize, a lot of this comes down to having good relationships with the schools, having that ongoing collaboration and discussion, so that if there's an issue at the school, in an ideal world, the school kind of wants to talk to the authorizer about it right away, as opposed to, we're scared of the authorizer, let's not have that conversation. It's better to have those conversations, and that comes from positive and trustful relationships. Next. And then, for our non-classroom based schools, the whole world went to non-classroom based at one point, so we all have a lot more awareness of some of the aspects of it. But the monitoring along the way looks a little different. If you're doing, for example, if part of your site visit is to observe a class, well, that may be, let's jump onto the Zoom and see if there's some synchronous instruction going on. How can we just see how that's going? Reviewing their online programs that they're implementing at the school so that you're familiar with how they're doing it, looking for their student engagement, making sure that students are engaged in this mode of learning that everybody's now familiar with, that didn't used to be, but that still, for some students, has some challenges. And there's, even in the law, it says, you have to make sure that this approach is working. Review the programs using the same criteria as the seat-based programs, but recognizing the differences in how the instruction is delivered. And again, if their board meetings are virtual, that's a way for you to have a presence and sort of now and then check in with them. Or in some cases, even if they're non-based program, they still are meeting in person as their board. And if that's in your geographic proximity, you may want to visit them there as well. Next slide. For our the shorthand for them is dependent charter schools, although that is not a term that exists in the education code. It's really a function of them being locally funded, so that the funding is through their authorizer versus coming directly from the state. They in many cases operationally look a lot like a school of the district, and for some purposes they are, but this ed code still states that charters should operate independently from the existing school district structure. So how you navigate that relationship between what on its face, it was a school that was set up by the district, but to be a charter school, it is something to be thoughtful about in the petition. And if you have MOUs or the equivalent of whatever internal document you have, because it's a school of the district for some purposes, attending to the fact that there are some proprieties of an authorizer charter school relationship that still have to be observed. If Debbie Deal were here, she'd be saying, you know, beware the commingling of funds. You have to be able to account for funds separately. The school still needs its own LCAP, even though it's a school of the district. And so how does that work in the case where the charter school governing board is the authorizer's board? Many of these dependent schools may have an advisory, you know, committee or council that helps advise the director of the school as to some things, but the governing relationship still is that of the districts or the county's, you know, board that set up the school. So, for example, some awareness on the part of the board about, you know, are we sitting now as the authorizer board or the charter schools board, and those things, you know, sometimes if that stuff has not been kind of attended to along the way, renewal and a renewal petition are an opportunity to take another look at that stuff. So we wanted to flag that here. Next slide. And just as a side note, you know, one of the reasons why that's a little murky is that the charter staff are usually also the authorizer staff. Oftentimes, because it looks a lot like a school of the district, the school leader who's designated to lead the charter school may not have the charter background and may not be familiar with any of this stuff. And then they start learning about charter schools, and they see things that apply to the independent schools and aren't always sure about, well, does that apply to me? Is my advisory council my governing board and has to do all the governing board stuff? And if it's been a little bit murky in practice in your dependent charter school, it may be something you want to take a look at as part of the renewal process, if not sooner, but certainly the renewal process is a time to take a fresh look at that stuff. And if you have an MOU, the MOU that you have, if you have an MOU with your authorized schools, the one that is with the dependent may be different just because operationally there are some differences. Next. I mentioned this one before, commingling of funds, some more when we get to that, but financial oversight, but the charter, again, has its own LCAP. And beware of the commingling of funds. Next slide. Material revisions. The material revisions are, you know, if there's a change that the school proposes that rises to the level of needing the authorizing board's approval, because it's a very significant thing. The renewal time is a time in which a lot of schools choose to bring that material revision forward. So rather than do it sort of midway through the charter term, which they may do, but they may just say, well, since we're going up for renewal, it's an opportunity for us to revisit a whole bunch of things, and we may want to put that here. So this is our opportunity to do that. You may need to be updating the petition to conform with new laws. We had AB 1505, and a lot of things have changed in law since the last time your petitions came to you, and so they may need to have some updates there. And they also, just as a note, there were some new changes in the law that provided new grounds for renewal for a new school, but do not apply at the renewal phase, except to the extent that, you know, if there's a material revision, let's say you wanted to start a new campus as part of your material revision, that's an expansion. And normally the new grounds for renewal that have to do with the fiscal impact of the school or failure to serve the entire community only apply to the establishment of a new school. But if the material revision to an existing charter also implicates those, then you can look at those things in your renewal process, but do so only with respect as to that material revision, not the overall renewal petition of the school. Next slide.
Okay, so that was a lot of information. I wasn't looking at the chat, but are there any questions? No questions.
There was actually one, and I answered it in the chat.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the chat.
Michelle, would you mind just sharing that answer out loud as well?
Sure. So the question was regarding the annual reports, are authorizers providing general annual reports about the charter or oversight reports that discuss the details and the results of their oversight for the year, or perhaps something in between. So my response was, we provide our reports annually, which cover governance, instruction, parent participation, demographics, fiscal, facilities, human resources, health and safety, operations, and academic achievement. It looks at all the documents, our visit, our interviews, and all of our oversight throughout the entire year.
Great, thank you. All right, so next slide, please. We're going to move on to the actual renewal part of that life cycle of a charter school. And so next slide. You will see this slide come up several times actually 6 times during this presentation, because this is the roadmap we're using. These will be the topics that we address in terms of renewal. And so I'm going to get us started with the very first bullet on reviewing the charter petition. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide and the next slide show the elements of a charter petition that either are required to be updated or might be updated. And so if you look at this slide, you'll see some things highlighted in bright yellow. Those are elements of the petition where you are definitely going to make sure that you review, because they should be updated. And then the ones that are kind of in the buff color are things that might potentially be updated. And so in the education program, which is element A, one of the things you want to think about is whether or not, or one of the things you want to look for rather, is whether or not independent study was included in the petition the last time it was renewed, and whether or not it has been included in the petition this renewal this time it's being renewed. Another thing to look for is TK. TK is not required for charter schools, but if a school is adding TK, you're going to want to talk to your legal counsel to determine whether or not it is considered a material revision. Keeping in mind that TK is considered the first year of a 2-year kindergarten program. So, you know, is it kindergarten, which they already serve, or is it a new grade level? Is something that you and your legal counsel are going to want to hash out. The other sections that you want to look at, governance is one area that you definitely need to look at, because it likely will be altered to include the names of the relevant qualifications of all their board members, including their student board members. Employee qualifications need to be updated to include the removal of credential flexibility, since that has gone away. Additionally, the health and safety procedures need to be updated to comply with the comprehensive school safety plan, making sure that they indicate that the plan has been reviewed by first responders, and they should also include information about opioid overdoses and the procedures to assess and respond to reports of dangerous, violent, or unlawful activity that is being conducted or threatened to be conducted at the school, at a school activity or on the bus. And then the next section to update that you need to check for updates is the means to achieve a balance of racial and ethnic, special education and English learners, including reclassified English learners. That section used to only require racial and ethnic balance, but now it includes special education and English learners. So next slide, please. So this next slide includes the remaining elements. Admission policies and procedures used to be called admission requirements. And so this section is going to need to be updated to ensure that the school is laying out, explaining in detail how their admission policies and procedures, what they are and how they are conducted. They can't just say that they have a lottery. They need to explain how the lottery is conducted, whether or not the preferences are weighted or how they're going to, if they're going to do all of one grade level first, or, you know, how they're going to do it exactly. They need to explain it so that someone else could actually replicate it. So that's the amount of detail they need for that section. And then the last section is suspension and expulsion processes. So that section needs to be updated to ensure that it contains all the information around involuntary dismissal from a charter school and due process protections that have recently been added. So all of these sections need to be updated and reviewed with your, well, they need to be updated by the charter school and renewed with or reviewed with you and your legal counsel. Next slide, please. Additionally, you're going to want to review the assurances and affirmations that are listed at the beginning of the petition. Make sure that you have a signature on the affirmations page, and check with your legal counsel to make sure that all the updates are correct. Next slide, please.
All right, so there are two questions. Well, actually, there's one question in the chat. The question says, what about special ed balance? What can they do about an imbalance? The law states that you need to have a reasonably comprehensive description of what you're going to do to try and create that balance, which means you need to have a plan. But if your plan only mentions racial and ethnic, then your plan is out of date. Your plan needs to include that you're going to look at racial, ethnic, special education, and English learners, and that you're going to be recruiting across all populations. And so that's the issue. Not if you have an imbalance, how are you going to address it? It's more of, are special education and English learners included in the recruitment plan?
And just to chime in on that a little bit, I mean, it warrants a look at, you know, how we communicate and interface with prospective families. What does our website say about our welcoming school learning environment? You know, there's been attention in the field nationally and in California about, you know, on the back end, is there counseling out of the more difficult cases? And those are just things to watch. I mean, you know, with all the enrollment questions, you know, if you are over enrolled and there's a lottery, the lottery may decide things. So there's some things that are more or less within the school's control about that stuff, but it's at least worth looking at, how do we do recruitment? How do we do admissions? How do we do enrollment? And then the services along the way, how are we providing the services? Is there something going on with the services we're providing that's causing us to lose students who had enrolled initially? And those are just worth a check of when you're addressing something like that. And that goes to the plan that Michelle's talking about.
So the next statement was, we have a charter with 30% special ed population, so the balance is the other way. Essentially, you've recruited a lot of students, but you can't counsel anyone out. We'll be getting to that in the future. You simply need to notate that you accept all students, and I think that's pretty much all you can do. Any other ideas at this moment on that one?
Well, I think it's the idea of the language was to make sure that we try to have it as representative of a population as possible. I mean, if a school has a certain characteristic that makes it more attractive to a family that may have a child with an IEP, that's all fine. There is fiscal implications of all that, and it gets complicated. But to a degree, a school has attracts more. I think we should just allow them to reflect on why they in fact may think that's one of the public goods they're trying to pursue for their community. So,
although it may cost the school not a little, more money to educate special ed students,
yes,
it's unusual to have a school with that many students, and I think that's a good thing, that they're not shirking any responsibility.
Right. Okay, then let me move on to the next step, back to the roadmap again. The second part of the roadmap is review updated enrollment and attendance data. Next slide, please. And for that, I get to just highlight 2 or 3 or 4 things. First, on the issue of attendance, declining enrollment. The issue there is to think through, oh, they're declining, but there's fiscal implications. And this slide's a lot about fiscal implications. Increasing grade levels, fiscal implications also, more money, but it also, if in fact it wasn't something that was originally in the charter, it's a material revision, a potential material revision that also then needs to follow the rules that Tom talked about in a little bit about that. Then decreasing grade levels, fiscal implications, and then expanding locations. Again, you have fiscal implications for that, and material revisions. And fiscal implications are the cost of potentially of a new facility and how it impacts the ability of the school's budget to handle that. And it's in fact clearly called out as a material revision requirement in the law. There is also, with the new legislation that was passed for 1505, there is also the ability to get additional enrollment data out of the Department of Education, and there is a request needs to be submitted on the screen, but that's a way to also get some historical data about the cumulative enrollment for each school year for a charter. That's all I've got on that. I'll pass it to the next person.
Okay. So Kathy, yes, thank you for your response on that imbalance piece that says the question is whether or not students are coming with IEPs or whether the school might be over-identifying students. So you may want to go back and look at that. So thanks, Kathy, for that comment. All right. Our next section of the roadmap is going to be looking at the charter performance categories list. Next slide, please. All right. So the law specifies that renewals and material revisions are governed by the standards and criteria that are used to determine whether or not to grant an initial charter petition. However, there are 2 grounds for denying charters submitted initially to school districts, which are the school is demonstrably unlikely to serve the interest of the entire community, or the school is not, school district is not positioned to absorb the fiscal impact. Both of those criteria cannot be used as part of the renewal criteria. But if there's a material revision that is included, you can go back and utilize those 2 grounds with regards to the extent of the material revision, but you cannot use it for grounds for renewal. Next slide. So, and we now have the 2023 dashboard that was released on December 23, and in March 24 we now have the new list of high, middle, and low. You can access that list, and there's also the presentation that was created by AMARD from March 26th, and you can access their presentation if you want more information as to how that high, middle, low list was actually created. Next slide. So for all for 24-25, all charters will be reviewed under the various tier system. So use that list to determine whether or not any of your schools are in high, middle, or low. Understand that that list does not include DAS schools or Dashboard Alternative School Status schools. Next slide. So I want to thank our friends over at Oakland Unified for the next couple of slides. They were the ones that put this beautiful information together and made it so clear and concise. So if you look at the high category, which is criteria 1 is all blue or green on the statewide indicators, or criteria 2, it's school-wide indicators that are same or higher than the state average. So when you're looking at the high category, it's essentially presumptive renewal, and that school can be renewed for either 5, 6, or 7 years. The low category is presumptive denial, on the other hand. That's where you look at either all red or orange on school-wide indicators, that's criteria 1, or school-wide on criteria 2, school-wide indicators that are the same or lower than statewide average. And that's a presumptive denial, but if looking at their verified data, you see that there's a really good pupil improvement plan, you may go back and give them a 2-year look back if you can see that there's actual growth that's happening at the school. Everyone else that's not either high or low falls into that middle category, and they are it's recommended that they can be a no default recommendation. Essentially, they can be renewed, and they can be renewed for 5 years. It's presumptive that yeah. Next slide, please. So high category is shall not deny for academic reasons, but you can deny if you can see under 47607E that they are unable to implement the program due to severe fiscal or governance concerns, or that they're not serving all students who wish to attend. Middle, you can deny for those reasons that were just listed for above, or you can also deny if the school has failed to meet or make sufficient progress and closure is in the best interest of the students, and the decision was greater weight placed on academic performance. In that low category, it is presumptive denial, but as I said, you can do that 2-year look back if you can see growth. Next slide. So we looked at the performance category list. So out of California, they took all of the schools, and we now have about 210 that are in the high performing category, 842 in the middle performing, 97 in the low performing, and there were 123 DOS schools. Well, that's the entire state of California, because they looked at all of the performance categories and all of the charter schools and gave us the criteria. But then we look over here at who's up for renewal. So for next year, 46 are in the high performing, 143 are in the middle, 24 are in the low, and 17 are DOS. Well, why didn't I give you the renewals for 25, 26 or 26, 27? The list changes every single year. So there's yes, knowing the information now will be helpful for those renewals out, because you're in the outer years. So because you can go back and look at where they were, and that can help guide your discussions moving forward on your annual reports, and saying, here's where you're at this moment. What do you need to do to now be in a better position for renewal for the next year when you come up for renewal? Next slide. So this happens to be one of my favorite slides, because everyone keeps coming to me and saying, yeah, but Michelle, we're green. We're green. You should say really good things about us. We're green. And I'm like, well, green does not always mean green. So when we look at this list, who's outperforming who? I mean, if we look at chronic absentee rate for school A and school B, they're technically outperforming the state, because they're both yellow, and orange is worse than yellow. But if we go to the next slide and we put in the actual data, well, the state only has a 10% chronic absentee rate, and yet both school A and school B have higher chronic absenteeism than the state does. Well, if you remember that the colors on the dashboard indicate status and change, you have to include the status numbers. You cannot just say, we're green. So, because green could indicate that you have reduced your chronic absentee rate faster than the state did. So make sure that you look at both sets of information as you're going through and looking at that renewal process. All right. Next slide. So let's look at some questions. All right. We have a potential collaboration with a junior college to set up an early college program, and I don't know that we'll have direct, okay, how should we address this when we submit our petition application? That's going to be your material revision. So you're going to need to make sure that you spell that out in your petition. You need to state it and then provide more information once you have it. Next question. Do low performance categories have any implication for charter schools that are not due up for renewal until 26 or 27? Well, as I said, it could have an implication. You need to have that conversation with that school now and realize that that list could change because it's based off of 2 years worth of data. So start having the conversations now, put them on notice that you're watching their academic performance, that you are concerned, and do they have a plan to try and address improving those academic performance? Could you institute a performance improvement plan and have it? Absolutely. It's part of your oversight and management. You should be looking at academics. You should be looking at performance. I know that we have schools that we have concerns over that we're in that red position. And we ask for quarterly academic data now to see whether or not they're on track and whether or not they're making growth. So you can do all sorts of things. You also need to make sure that if they are falling into that low category and that they have lots of reds, are those red categories, those being addressed in their LCAP? So you have lots of options. And I hope I answered all your questions.
So
And-
Michelle, I want to go back to Kristen's question, Kristen Miller. So if their collaboration with the junior college is not ready, completed by the time they are up for renewal, they would just go for renewal without that, right? And then come back and ask for a material revision after the collaboration is ready.
Absolutely.
I think the key piece in both situations is good communication. On Kristen's piece, there certainly could be there has to be some agreement about what's going to be a sufficiency on the material revision. And that's why communication has to happen from the school and with an understanding from the authorizer. For Riley's question, I think it's also there. Michelle spoke about the type of things that the authorizer can do because they have a level of concern there. On the other side of it, the charter should be thinking about this and approaching the authorizer with their plan, and together, if the best way is that the charter is approaching the authorizer and says, I have a specific plan. Do you concur this is good? What are your suggestions for potentially making it even more powerful or more convincing? But I do think that the conversation needs to be a collaborative one, back to the idea of no surprises, because if they don't improve that performance, the outcome will potentially be a non-renewal.
So Riley just asked the question, are there any guidelines for presumptive non-renewal for low performance category when the authorizer's data is just as bad, if not worse? And if there were similarly categorized, would they fall into the low category? So unfortunately, that's not part of the guidelines with regards to the presumptive non-renewal. In the middle category, you're still looking at, is closure in the best interest of students? And that's where you could look at that comparison data. But with regards to the low, it says presumptive denial, but may renew for 2 years if the charter school is making meaningful steps to address the underlying cause of the low performance with a written plan and verified data shows 1 year's progress for students or strong post-secondary outcomes. So this is where that gets into that question of what is your data story? Are your students making growth? Are they coming in from a really low place and are they growing? So you really want to make sure you're telling that data story, and we're going to be getting into the data story in the next section.
Okay, let's go to the next slide then, potentially, if you would, which is, again, we're back to the roadmap. Michelle just spent a time reviewing the criteria that gets you on the high, middle, and low categories. My work now is to review a little bit about the academic performance. And here, I think the best way to put it is that, according to 47607, the charting authority shall consider school-wide performance data and performance of all subgroups on state and local indicators. In addition to the state and local indicators, the charter school shall consider clear and convincing evidence showing either of the following. The school has achieved measurable increases in academic achievement as defined as at least 1 year's progress for each year in school. And then second, strong post-secondary outcomes as defined by college enrollment, persistence, and completion rates equal to similar peers. Next slide, please. A lot of that conversation is revolving around verified data, verifiable data, and alternative metrics. And verified data is the one we're talking about the most. It's data based on a list established by the State Board of Education. The list is good through January 1, 2026. It is it allows the data to be presented by a charter. And if in fact verified data is provided by the charter, the authorizer has a responsibility to look at it. There's also verifiable data, which also can be considered if the dashboard indicators are not available. And that is what is anything the authorizer determines can be verified. Verified data could include assessments in the verified list. Verifiable data does not have a sunset date. And then there's alternative metrics, which are very different than any of the stuff we're talking about at this point. They're for DAS schools, and those, in fact, should have been, and if they haven't, there seems to be a discussion determined by a meeting between the DAS charter and its authorizer during the first term of its charter. So if any of you have DAS schools and you haven't got that in place, that's in fact some catch up that you in fact need to do. It is an important piece there. And let's go to the next slide. Now, under the academic performance area, you have the use of, these are the assessments that are in play. The CAS, English language proficiency for California, the LPAC, and California dashboard and local indicators, verified data. Those are the packages of things that an authorizer needs to be aware of and considering as part of the process, especially in the absence of any of the data that might have been not available for prior years. We now have 2 years of data that does help us in fact to try to have for the first time a full dashboard. Next slide. Now, these are the procedures that are important to the reuse of verified data. First, there is still an understanding and that there needs to be some flexibility about the use of data. In terms of verified data, it's up to the charter school to provide that information. And then if it's provided, the authorizer has an obligation to review it. Multiple measures, the charter school can present chartering authority with multiple verified data sources. So there may in fact be a source for early childhood or the early grades that is using a different verified measure tool than say something for high school. The transparency is really important in all this. The the charter school has an obligation and the authorizer has an opportunity to make sure that that the data that's being relied upon for the renewal discussion is clear. And done in a manner that the authorizer can understand where it comes from, its validity, and how it's in fact was created. There also is an important piece about security, that assessments need to be conducted in a way that represents a secure testing environment, and that's where it goes back to the verified data and the publisher's requirements for process. So that's it. That's important. The other part here is about longitudinal progress. This is about progress. This is about, in fact, where students were and where those students are at a different point in time. The data from different data points needs to be those same students. That's the key point. And if there are differences in the assessment of student performance from CAST, the idea is to present the data in a way that places it within the context of CAST. It's not to be said to replacement for or to disallow the use of the CAST data. It's the issue for compatibility. As it relates to English language arts and mathematics, again, it goes back to the consistency of the data can be used. The methodologies that are mutually agreed upon by the chartering authority and the charter school may be used to supplement the dashboard results, but again, it can't be used to dispute dashboard results. And then finally, there is an ability of an authorizer to consider that the charter school may may present evidence of major learning disruptions that have occurred. Yeah, we all know about COVID, but for a number of our charters and our communities, they've had natural disasters, fires, floods, and other things, which in fact are also important. So let me stop with that and go to the next slide. Okay. These are the following academic progress indicators are on the list. The next 3 slides is just a listing of the different verified data sources. These are all part of what's available through the state board. But this is the first list. Let's go to the second slide. We're not going to go into these in depth. We just want to make sure we put these in front of you so you can see which ones are out there. That's slide 2. And then go to slide 3. So there's a bunch of them, and it's important that that there be conversations with the charter and the authorizer, because if the authorizer isn't familiar with some of them, it's important to have these conversations ahead of time. If it's been provided, the authorizer then needs to have an understanding about how to evaluate and judge those pieces of information. So that's pretty important. Next slide. Then there's the second part of it, which is adopted post-secondary indicators. And the post-secondary indicators that are out there are from the California Department of Education DataQuest. You've got a college going rate. You've got Cal State University's enrollment dashboard student origin, which gives you some good information. You have the CalPAS high school to community college transition report. Many of our students start at community college. There's the National Clearinghouse. If you're not familiar with that, you should probably, we have information about how to find more of that. And then, of course, there's University of California admissions by school source and the University of California undergraduate graduation rate. These are sources of information that the charter, individual charters will be using and potentially presenting to you as part of their documentation of their academic progress. And with that was a lot of info, and there'll be opportunities for questions, but I'll pass it on. So I wasn't sure who was listed to handle the questions, but if someone wants to throw in there. Let's see where we want to start.
Okay, I was muted and I was talking, so
Thank
sorry
you.
about that.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any questions that haven't been answered. Kristen Miller had a question about not finding her chronic absenteeism indicator on the dashboard, and the response that was that if you're in a high school, you won't have chronic absenteeism. So I think that was the only question that came up, unless I missed something.
Just reminder that verified data, you are supposed, it shall be reviewed. You don't, charter schools may not have to submit it, but if you are submitting it, yes, it shall be reviewed. So, it's best practice to review the latest data, but it's also, you don't want to create an extra burden for everybody, because not all data may be important at that moment, but you do want to tell a really good data story. So that doesn't mean just show the high points, go from year to year to year showing only the high points. If there's some declines, show that in there as well. Make sure that you are telling your data story, and say, we have a red here. That's okay. Make sure you have a plan for how you're going to address it. Everybody's had downturns, but it's what are you going to do with those downturns? Don't just sweep it under the carpet. Make sure that you're sharing your story, share where you're headed. So.
Great advice to the charter schools that are out there.
Well, there is one, I think, Riley, the point made, so using verified data from the list of publishers is only if the dashboard indicators are not sufficient. I think it needs to be clear that that's a determination that the charter makes about what they wish to submit. So if they think their story is better described in terms of their data story, then they have the right to submit that data. And if they submit it, you have an obligation to review.
Oh, two more messages just came in.
So the question is, can authorizers request unaltered reports from vendor portals so long as there is no PI? Many schools take the data, repackage it, and then submit it. Yes, authorizers can request the unfiltered data and do their own analysis. Oh, personally identifiable information. Yes. Thank you, Matt.
All righty. So next slide, please. Thank you for those questions. Next slide. Okay, so we're moving on to the next section in our roadmap, which is reviewing the governance and financial and operations and complaints section of a petition. So so if you're denying a renewal on non-academic grounds, there are two reasons you can use to do that. So a chartering authority may deny renewal of a charter school in any of the three performance categories by finding that the school is demonstrably unlikely to successfully implement the program set forth in the petition due to either substantial fiscal or governance factors or not serving all students who wish to attend. So even a high-performing school, which we say is a presumptive renewal, can be denied based on one of those two findings. But in order to deny them on those findings, the authorizer has to provide at least 30 days notice to the charter school of the alleged violation and give the charter school a reasonable opportunity to cure the violation, including putting together a corrective action plan proposed by the school. So the chartering authority may then deny the renewal only after making a finding that either the corrective action that was proposed by the school was unsuccessful, or that the violations are sufficiently severe and pervasive as to render the corrective action plan unviable. Also, an authorizer can deny a charter petition in the middle tier if it makes written findings with specific facts that the school has failed to make sufficient progress towards meeting standards that provide a benefit to the school students, that the school closure is in the best interest of the students, and that the school decision to deny the renewal provided greater weight to the performance on academic measures. So an authorizer can also deny a renewal of a DOS school after making written factual findings that the closure is in the best interest of the students. And that is something that has not yet been tested. So we don't know exactly what that looks like. So there was a question, can we clarify 30 days from when? 30 days, so you have to give them at least 30 days notice before you can make a finding. So if you have a school that has some of these issues that's coming up for renewal, you may want to go ahead and give them their notice now so that they can have more than 30 days to attempt to cure the violation. Next slide, please. Okay, and so in terms of reviewing the complaints, governance, financial, and operations and complaints, there are reports that you can, this is about serving all students who wish to attend. So the CDE will provide reports to you upon authorizers upon request that will show you whether or not students have been who were attending the school during one year are not there the next year. So there's a report called the Cumulative Enrollment Report that you can get. There is another report you can get that will show the percentage of students who are enrolled at any point between the beginning of the school year and census day, who are then not enrolled at the end of the year. There's a third report you can get that shows you the percentage of students enrolled in the prior school year who are not enrolled as of census day in the current year. So I think these links to get the reports are on the resource page. Okay, yes, they are. All right, next slide, please. All right, questions. Okay, I see that Rick from CDE has put into the chat the links for the reports. Thank you, Rick. And David, did you want to comment or just leave your chat there?
Oh, I think we typically always say it. I just wanted, because this is the right place to say it. If you're in a situation where you are concerned that you may in fact be in a non-renewal situation, it's our strongest recommendation is you engage your legal counsel in this process. They're an important piece to guide you to make sure that all the steps are done well and appropriately according to the law.
Great advice. Thank you for that. Next slide.
Okay, and continuing on our roadmap, we're now to, as Dave just mentioned, non-renewal standards. And in terms of that, if we go to the next slide, these are the marching orders for authorizers. If you're talking about that middle tier school that where you're looking at a non-renewal, you have to issue written findings setting forth with some detail how in the evaluation of the authorizer, the charter school has failed to meet or make sufficient progress toward meeting the standards that benefit the schools. And this is a pretty high bar. The closure of the charter school is in the best interest of pupils. And as part of that as you're looking at the criteria set forth in this section of the Ed Code, that you're documenting in your written findings how you have met the obligation to assign greater weight to performance on the measures of the academic side of the operations for this purpose. So next slide. Oh, and then so that's just populating our roadmap with that last little bit, and then the emphasis on closure in the best interest of the students. Next slide again.
All right, so we have now completed the roadmap. Are there questions before we get into the next section, which is the actual process and procedures? Okay, next slide. So we're going to be talking about the process and procedures. We've already mentioned a little bit around material revisions, DOS schools. We're going to be talking about state board authorized charter schools, renewal timelines, and the process. So next slide, please. So remember that the new grounds for denial only apply with regards to the material revision and the impact of the material revision. They do not apply for renewal itself. Next slide. So DOS schools, as we've stated before, it is a presumption of renewal. You can deny if you find that closure is in the best interest of students. You should have looked at creating that set of metrics for renewal in that first year of your charter. And if you haven't, you should probably go and sit down now. You do want to look at academic performance, and there are resources on DOS schools on the CDE website. So please go and take a look at those. Next slide. State board authorized charter schools. So California, the Education Code 47605.9 allows the current State Board of Education charter schools to continue operating until renewal. And then they have to go to the local district in which they were located and apply for renewal. If that local district denies renewal for that charter, then the charter can appeal directly to the State Board of Education. They bypass the county in that instance. They apply directly to the State Board of Education. The State Board, in this instance, will do a de novo review of that renewal under 47605. If they are approved, then the State Board will work with the charter to determine who the new authorizer is. And then the charter school will go through the process of getting a new CDS code with that new authorizer. The education codes cannot be waived by the State Board, and this does not apply to charter districts or all charter districts, which were established under 47606. When you're dealing with a charter district, the charter district goes to the county for approval of renewals, and the State Board and state superintendent will only get involved if there's going to be a denial or a revocation. So those are the only things that they held, but essentially for charter districts, the county board, the county Office of Education is the authorizer. Next slide. So I want to thank my colleague Matt for putting this wonderful flow chart together. As you can see, we start at the beginning, either initial or renewal, and you start moving across. Once you submit to the district, if the district approves, then they're the authorizer. If they deny, then it goes to the county. If your authorizer is the county, you don't have to go to the district. So you submit your renewal to the county. If the county approves, then they remain your authorizer. If they deny, then it would go to the ACCS to look at abuse of discretion to determine to whether or not to make a recommendation to the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education will then make that decision as to whether or not to hear the case or to act on the case. If they act on the case and they approve the findings of denial, then there's no further appeal rights. If, however, they say you abuse the discretion, then it gets kicked, then you essentially are renewed again. Next slide. So looking at the renewal timelines, the charter petition for renewal starts when you submit the petition, which has been updated, as we've already talked about, that includes a signed certification of completion. You then have 60 days from that date to hold the public hearing, and you have 90 days from that moment to hold the decision hearing. And remember, that says 60 days to hold it. You can hold it sooner. You do not have to hold it at 60 days. But you do have to post your findings and recommendations 15 days prior to that decision hearing. Then if that decision is denied, then you have 30 days in which to appeal, and you would have to submit that decision or that appealed petition to both the district and the county at the same time. This is assuming that you've started at the district level. If that petition is materially changed, then the county has to kick it back to the district to review within 30 days. Next slide. So there's a question. Is the authorizing agency required to notify the petition where the findings are posted on the website? I don't know that there's a requirement in law that you have to notify them where to find them. However, I would assume if they're on if you have a charter schools page on your website, that you should post them on the charter schools page.
I would also suggest that since this is a recommendation to the board, that they often will appear on the documentation for board agendas and board related stuff, Michelle. That might be a second thought.
It could be, yes. But that's not saying that it has to be posted on your board agenda page. Because it's 15 days ahead of time, other than like the board agenda being posted under the Brown Act requirements. So
right. But I would also add, this one is put in because it was there was confusion. So it's probably good that everybody does know where to look to avoid that confusion.
absolutely. All right. So here is a sample renewal timeline. If you submit to your district on August 10th, then the district decision would be November 9th. You would then submit your renewal appeal on December 10th to the county. You then go, the county would have to decide by March 8th. And you would then only have 2 days in which to file that appeal to the state board to meet their timeline. ACCS would be in June, but the state board meeting would be held in July. So there is a list. There is the new list for the 24-25 appeal denial deadlines. And that link is available for you if you are in that route.
Michelle,
Sure.
I think we have that slide up here because we want to give people an idea of the timeframes that are there. Do you want, the good news here is if the district, the charter submitted and they got an approval, we would be ending very early. But I think it might help looking at the questions in the chat that in some ways this is a heads up that you might be getting applications earlier than you otherwise think because of the extended timeframes.
That's true. So So given the sample timeline and the fact that many authorizers do not allow for a renewal more than 1 year out, will authorizers consider a longer runway for charters to renew? I think one of the things you have to remember is that if you start in July, you may still meet your timelines. And July 1st is in that final year of your term. So you could technically submit on July 1st, but understand that usually in that renewal process, there's going to be a site visit. And if the site visit wants to go and talk to the students, it's going to be a little difficult if school doesn't start until late August for that process to happen to still meet that 90-day deadline.
And the other thing I would add is that while there might be some language in MOUs or other things, there's clearly a discussion about the ability of a charter to apply for renewal at any time. And this is where conversations are important and need to be done to avoid conflict. Because if it is in fact impossible for a charter to go through the full process, they may feel obligated to apply earlier. And let's see if we can resolve conflict before it starts, then have those conversations. It is a difficult area that I think is unclear in practice and law because of the extended timeframes that are now existing under just the way the state board works and schedules.
So I appreciate Rick's comment that says charter school applicants can submit to the SBE within 30 days of the county's denial. But if the school in this scenario missed the March 10th deadline, they would be heard by the state board in September if the state board decides to hear it, which would be outside of that charter term ending.
Right.
So I agree with Dave. Make sure you start having these conversations now.
Yesterday.
Next slide. All right, so as Dave so rightly put, look and follow your MOU guidelines. Submit during that final year of your charter term. Submit once you've received that statewide testing data. As I had put in the chat before, that list, the high, middle, and low list, applies throughout the year until the new list arrives. You do not need to go through the process of trying to create a whole new list. That doesn't mean that you can't utilize new data to try and tell a better data story, but make sure that you are following those timelines. Things you want to look at. You want to look at the school dashboard. You want to look at comparison data. You want to look at verified data. You want to look at verifiable data. You want to look at academic growth for the student groups and cohorts. Look at the appeal timelines. So there's a lot to consider when you're looking at renewals. So a question just popped up. Is there an expected date for the next category list? Well, the next category list can't come out until after the next dashboard has been delivered. So it'll happen in early 2025. The dashboard is expected to happen at the end of November, I believe, is when, because it's moving earlier and earlier. They're trying to get the dashboard done, but it's going to be taking faster times. So they will not come out with a new list until after that dashboard has been published. Next slide, please. So we did have a question that came from the field with around what is the staff analysis and finding of fact format? How do you put this thing together when you're putting out your information? So I gave you our basic flow chart of what we start filling in for our staff analysis and finding of fact with regards to a renewal. So we start out with the background, history, and procedural status. We then proceed to start laying out all of the criteria for renewal. We then look at the charter petition and whether or not it has been updated and all of those criteria have been adjusted and whether or not everything's been met. Are there any material revisions included in it? And we then go into the additional criteria for denying a charter, and finally we make a recommendation to the board. I can't share with you a sample because they're individually based by school, but you can always go back and look at old board documents because those are in the public record. Next slide. So here's a couple of questions for you as we're heading into our breakout rooms. So do you know where your schools stand? Do you know your school, do you know the performance category requirements that are being used for renewal? Do you have any DOS schools? So where are you? What are your questions? Where are you headed? How can we as a group help each other? So I think there's one more question that was in the chat. Are there any guidelines around a charter that submits a renewal petition under the current list when listed as low performing and then wants to resubmit when the new list is produced, assuming that they are in the middle to high or middle? If you submit your renewal, you can't pull it unless you're going to pull it back completely before a decision gets made. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Yes. Look at 47605K1A. There you go.
Yeah, but let me add, because I think this is, again, where you need to talk to your legal. And as you said, if the authorizer has taken action, they've taken action. I would suggest that until they take action, it's always possible for an entity to withdraw something. I'd be talking to my legal staff for advice here, because we've certainly had situations where an authorized a charter is applied and they're running into something and we're saying we're not going to change anything. We're not going to take this modification. If you want a modification to the petition you put in front of us, whether it be a renewal or a charter, an original petition, you're going to need to withdraw and restart the process. So I think that's the part of the conversation that people just need to be recognizing and make sure they've got sound legal standing when whatever steps they take.
All right. So next slide.
All right. Well, we said at the beginning that we wanted to get through the material and leave ample time for discussion, and we're to that point. And in order to make it easier with a large group, we are borrowing our charter chat model of dividing the authorizers into three groups and then having a discussion for our non-authorizer partners who have joined us today. We'll be going to that. Could we get the Jamboard link? Also borrowing from our charter chat model in the chat, and so that everybody can. Are we doing Jamboard?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just that's a nice way to just take some Post-it notes and write down some things, particularly if there's questions that people have that we'd like to come back and discuss in a charter chat or something. But when we reconvene as a large group, we'll share out. And the Jamboard notes kind of help facilitate that process for everybody. Sorry, does anybody have the Jamboard?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Oh, it is. Okay, I missed it. Sorry, I'm not seeing it. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry, I was. But anyway, we'll divide us up into those groups as well. We're at 7:24. Do we want? What do you think, Michelle? What do we want to maybe?
We can easily do 20 minutes.
Yeah, let's do that. We may end up finishing a little early, and I'm sure we won't get any complaints about that in the evaluations if we do. So why don't we aim to come back, well, let's make it quarter of, and then that'll give us plenty of time to wrap up with some sharing out, and then leave you with some other pointing you to some resources and upcoming fun events. Question about the slides are recording. I think that's always, yes. We will always post our stuff on the CASI website. And for those of you who are new to CASI, there's getting to be quite the archive of past trainings and recordings and sessions and resources on there, because everything it gets posted on the CASI website for CDE. So let's jump off into our groups, and we have, in addition to, Michelle said, look, what's your landscape looking like? And if you're a school, for your non-authorizer partners, share that. But we have some discussion questions. Where do your schools fall in terms of the high, middle, and low categories? What are you doing with COVID and showing growth? And how are we talking about using verified and verifiable data in telling the renewal story? So those are all kind of interesting things we can say. Let's take stock of where we are for the authorizers with our portfolios, and for our non-authorizer partners where you folks are looking. And with that, did we get all the questions answered? I see that's been popping up.
Yeah, it's basically if they have submitted and action's been taken, can they resubmit? The answer is no. But if they've withdrawn, can they resubmit? The answer is yes. Because the timeline would start all over again.
So when you get to the Jamboard, I'll just note that because it's our CASI Jamboard, it reads Northern, Central, and Southern authorizers. So you can ignore that. So the Group A with Dave will use the page that says Northern, and Group B with me will use Central, and the Group C will use South, and the non-authorizers are the same. All right, let's jump, shall we?
Opening now.
Are we all back? Yes, we're all back. My Hollywood Squares has been all scrambled, so I wasn't able to see who's back yet. I think we're all back. And we have this slide that says final thoughts and questions, but this is our chance to have each of the groups kind of report out and share any discussions or questions or observations that they had from their group. So why don't we get started with Group A?
I think that used to be called Northern, Tom, so that should be us.
Okay.
Okay. So first, we spent a good amount of time on the issue of evaluating governance, charter school board governance, and how do you do it? What are some aspects, what you should expect, and all that. So there was a rich conversation there about what some are already doing, about the needs to make sure if you're going to do something that it's transparent, that everybody knows it, and the need to actually have some more work done here so that we have some common templates and some common understanding of what that's to be. There was also then a good amount of conversation about the idea of making recommendations or not on renewal petitions or on petitions in general, and the role of how staff supports the board, how in fact important it is and how difficult it is for the position of staff to be in to make sure it addresses appropriately all the requirements of law, so that the record's clean and the record is well done, well documented. But at the same time, that may not, in fact, the board may not want to see that in terms of turning into a recommendation or all that. But the challenge that authorizing staff have in this process. Group 1, Northern. Anybody else want to add to that? But that's a quick summary with that I gathered. Hearing none, back to you, Tom.
Yeah, let's jump to Group 2. Was that Mifla or Michelle?
You're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. So that was my group. We had a couple of the larger authorizing shops in California in our group, and spent a little bit of time pestering one of them with questions about how they do renewals on 50 schools for next year. And then we talked, and it was helpful to have those folks in the room because there was an authorizer from a small shop who has a school that is basically in academic and potentially fiscal distress. And so folks were kind of giving him some advice on how to go forward in terms of documenting and documents to request and things like that. Additionally, we talked about DOS schools and making sure to have mutually agreed upon criteria for renewal, and just kind of went one by one, finding out who had how many schools and what the configuration of those schools were. Is there anybody in our group who wants to add something else? No? Okay.
All right. So in group 3, we had a few things come up. One question that was raised was if you have a high tier school, there's some discretion on the part of the authorizer about a 5, 6, or 7-year contract term under that high tier. What are people thinking about that? 7 years seems like an awfully long time, but that relates to, well, how much is our kind of engagement and oversight along the way? And then, somebody suggested, one model that you might want to look at, apparently San Diego Unified has set forth its criteria for 5, 6, and 7, and that might be one example to look at if you're trying to think about how we want to approach that judgment call on 5, 6, or 7 years. We had a question about, if let's say your petition for renewal includes a material revision that's an expansion, so you are actually looking under those criteria about the fiscal impact that would apply to a new school petition because it's an expansion. And the district wants to say, no, we can't absorb the impact. Does the petitioner are they in a position to say, well, actually, to argue, yes, you can, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to, 10% raises this last year, but that's not our issue. That we're very early on in the stages of those new provisions being litigated out. There was a case in which the case was attempted by the part of the petitioner to say, no, we think the district actually can. But it's very early on, and you'd have to be talking to lawyers about that one. Is kind of we punted and say that ought to be a lawyer thing because we're still very early on in seeing that provision used. On appeal, petitioners, can't change the petition that they submitted to the district, otherwise it has to be kicked back to the district. But the question became, in the intervening between a denial and an appeal, if there's more academic data to bring to bear on that discussion at the county level, is there something untoward about presenting that? And the consensus there that at least in our group was, well, the petition is the petition, but the evidence you're marshaling in supporting that petition, particularly in that tier where even under a presumed non-renewal in tier 3, there's some discretionary room to say, but we think the school's making progress and has a good plan and that kind of thing, that you would want as much information as possible to inform that consideration. And then the last one was sort of for a non-renewal based on the academics. If it goes to the county level, what is their sort of standard of review for a district's conclusion that, well, we looked at the academic data and this is the tier that it's placed in, and we don't think that they're making a lot of progress, but the county, it's a de novo review and they still have discretion like the district authorizer has to, even in a you know, the reverse is true, that it wouldn't be an appeal in a tier one, but even tier one and tier two leave room for some authorizer discretion. The default assumption, the presumption is renewal for tier one and non-renewal for year three, but there's some judgment there. And so the counties would be in a position to exercise that judgment as well. Anybody from my group want to add anything to that recap? Okay, then let's jump to our non-authorizer partners, Michelle.
All right, so we had a really good conversation. I want to thank the rest of the group. We started off with a conversation about verified and verifiable data, and then understand that we need to make sure that we're not just looking at that growth data, that because there might be some we need to understand that there is a small difference between 40 and the 50th percentiles versus the 10th and the 20th percentiles, and looking at that so that you're getting a full picture. But we also needed to have that conversation about tell the full data picture. Don't just, if you have a decline, don't cover it up, don't hide it, point it out, say that you know that it's there, and how are you moving forward with it. So really looking at that data story. The next topic that we talked about was state board SBE schools that are going up for renewal at the local level, and a request that SBE, CDE kind of contact the district and let them know that, hey, a renewal may be coming your way, just so that everybody's on the same playing field and they can start having those conversations. There was also a conversation about what does it really mean to look at closures in the best interest of students? And if you've got a low performing school and a low performing district authorizer, what is that conversation about? Is closure in the best interest of students? Another question that came up was you've got a school that's in that low performing category, but the big problem is staff turnover. So how do you have that conversation about some of those operational issues and academic, and that correlation with academics? So we had lots of conversations, but the final thought was start having those conversations with your authorizers now, so that you can get that conversation going and figure out what story needs to be shared and how you present that information. So anything that from the rest of the team that wanted to add? Or did I get it? Okay.
All right, well, let's wind up with, we've got the all-important evaluation, which we cling to those, we hang on every word and refine our processes. So please, we can, it's in the chat as well, but please share your thoughts. I don't remember who has what slide at the end here, so just keep going and anybody chime in. Oh, just sort of upcoming events, keep going. And particularly if we've got people that are new to CASI, we have a listserv. You can get, that way you get notified of everything that's coming up. Check out the CASI website. I mentioned there's a lot of great information there. And every time we have one of these, it grows a little bit more. That's the CASI email address if you have questions you want to direct to the group. Next. Charter chats. Michelle, you want to talk about this a little bit?
We're going to have on Wednesday coming up. We've got a lot of things going on right now. Wednesday, we will have our charter chat, and at this one we'll have CCAP presenting their anti-fraud task force report. So if you're interested in hearing about that, make sure you're at that meeting. We'll be talking about legislative and state board information. So and financial hot topics. We do this every single month.
Yep, it's 1 hour out of your life, and we like to think it's a pretty good an hour well spent. Next, we do quarterly trainings like this one. We do them virtually each quarter, but we just like to make sure everybody knows that if you would like the show to come on the road and visit a county office or a district near you, please reach out, because we've been doing a few of these on site sometimes, and particularly if you have very, very small authorizers and no dedicated staff, it's maybe hard to plug them into other things. But if they're, you're used to meeting at your county office, and we could come in. We did one in Tulare. We got Kings and Fresno this coming week. So let us know if you'd be interested in having us come share some trainings with you locally. Next. We've got a CCAPS conference is coming up in June, where that's a chance for everybody to get together in person. That's Cassie will provide sort of an authorizing and oversight 101 pre-conference, which is divided into 2 half days for more digestibility. If you are a small authorizer, we'll even reimburse you for that hotel night. That's a standalone thing. You could just do the pre-conference for $50 and get the hotel covered, or you can stay on for the rest of the conference, which goes until Friday morning. It's good for beginners. It's good for veterans, and we've got role-like groups and a lot of fun stuff there. It's going to be a great program. Next, contact information for CCAP is here, and the next slide has Santa Clara. So you can find us there, and you can find us. You can just reach out to Cassie. That's another just easy way. And I think that runs us to the very end. So again, if you would take a few minutes of your life to share some feedback, the survey, we'd be most grateful, and we look forward to seeing at least some of you Wednesday with this month's Charter Chat.
Yes,
Thanks,
there
everybody.
are 39 of you here, and there's only 5 responses on the survey. So please give us more responses.
Thanks, everyone.